But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Hello, and welcome to January's Community Chat, which is also our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Assembly. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Brenda Flanagan. Since 2003, Dr. Flanagan has served as a cultural ambassador for the United States Department. In 2005, she was the first American writer to be sent on a cultural mission to Libya in 25 years. Her first visit opened doors to other American cultural missions. Dr. Flanagan has served in Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Chile, Kuwait twice, Tajikistan twice, Morocco, Tunisia 6 times, Pakistan 4 times, Turkmenistan, Chad, Panama, India, and the Czech Republic, which she's been to 3 times. In addition to lectures on African American, Caribbean, and world literatures, Dr. Flanagan performs her work and engages in dialogue with citizens, students, professors, creative artists, and journalists in these diverse countries on such subjects as U.S. public policies, diversity, politics and race, and the achievement of success in hostile environments. Dr. Flanagan has a special connection to the Greenhills community. She has guest lectured and was the first organizer and presenter of the McDowell Writing Award. She's also the grandmother of an alum and a current student. Dr. Flanagan, I know you have such a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you being able to take your time to talk to us today.
Well, good afternoon, Greenhills. It is just wonderful again to be here. Good afternoon, Ms. Hall. It's great to see you. You know, Greenhills is close to my heart and has been close in my heart for many, many years, not just because my son and my grandchildren have attended there, but a certain person with whom I'm going to have a conversation with this afternoon is here and works as your chief diversity officer as well as a teacher. And so I know we don't have a lot of time for this program, so I want to ask Ms. Hall, are you ready this afternoon to make some good trouble?
I am.
That's what we're here for.
Yes, I am ready, and I'm sure our students are as well. So let's begin. What is important to highlight at this time? We're celebrating the birthday of the man, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, you know, I've always found it amazing that we celebrate when he was born, but we don't like to talk about, you know, when he died, and that's okay. That's okay. We're not going to talk about that, but we need always to remember that a good man died. But in celebrating Dr. King's birthday, we also have this opportunity to celebrate the lives of many other people, the lives of people like John Lewis, whom we lost early this year and who was a friend, and from whom the title for this talk comes, Making Good Trouble. And actually, John Lewis says that it's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King who always exhorted him to go out and make good trouble. So when we celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're celebrating people like John Lewis. We're celebrating people like the 3 women I'll be talking about today. And we're celebrating really goodness and decency in America, because at this time, coming to the end of 2020, a year when we have suffered so many vicissitudes, when so many people have died as a result of this horrid COVID-19 virus, when, you know, we have come through 4 years of another kind of political pandemic. It's really important for us at this time to come together in the ways in which Dr. King would have loved us to come together, in the ways in which John Lewis would have loved us to come together, to celebrate Dr. King's birthday and to celebrate three women who made their presence felt, I think, indelibly in the fabric of the United States, as much as Dr. King did. And I know he would be happy to send up some balloons today, just as we're doing for him, for these three women.
Now, before we get into the three women, I think we could talk about one woman who was very close to Dr. King, who we rarely talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about his mother?
Yes, Alberta Williams King. Do you know, one of the things that Dr. King's mother shares with these three women I'm talking about today is that she was a teacher. And we very rarely ever remember Dr. King, and I'd like to say in jest, yes, that we wouldn't have a Dr. King if it weren't for Alberta Williams King. But we must also remember that after burying her son, this woman herself was killed, and killed in church by a young man, a raving lunatic who died some years ago. And here she was on a Sunday in church playing her piano and was struck down. And we must not forget that she lived a glorious life, brought us this man whose birthday we're celebrating today. But sadly, also, we need to commemorate Alberta Williams King. Remember her, remember the mother of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times that there are three women that you're going to talk to us about. Who are they and why are they important?
Well, there are three of a lot of women I'd like to talk about, but sadly, Greenhills just has a very short assembly, and the kids are probably itching already to go run outside, but it's going to be January, so maybe it's going to be snowing and you won't be able to run outside. But these women are very important to me, and they should be to America, and they should be to all of us as part of the Greenhills family. The first one I want to talk about is, her name is Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta. And all of these women, by the way, were influenced by Dr. King, who we must always remember was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. So although today we're focusing on Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta and these two other women, we want to remember that the principles that guided their lives and their actions are also deeply embedded in the principles that Dr. King espoused and that he learned from Mahatma Gandhi. So we're covering, we're diverse today, Ms. Hall. We are Indian, African-American women, to Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta. I don't know if some of the kids in the assembly might remember that, was it last year, when I was at Greenhills, I talked a little about Cesar Chavez, who led that struggle for the farm workers out in California. And I remember mentioning that for a long while, none of my children were able to eat grapes because Cesar Chavez led that grape boycott. And I was living in Ann Arbor, and I was a student at University of Michigan, and a lot of us were trying to be supportive of the farm workers. Well, a woman who I did not mention, but who was instrumental in getting the bills passed in lobbying for the rights that farm workers enjoy today is Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta. And just to let you know, if some of you would like to learn more about her, there's a wonderful documentary on PBS that you could tune into and stream and find out a lot more about her. One of the amazing things about her is that she had 7 children. You know, she was born actually in New Mexico, but grew up in a farming community in Stockton, California, after her parents were divorced. Her mother ran a small hotel for a lot of the farm workers, the immigrants, and these were people from all parts of the migrant workforce. There were Filipinos, there were Chinese, there were African Americans, there were Mexicans, and many of them would get housing at Dolores's mother's small hotel. Delores was a majorette in high school. I love the fact that that she was a majorette. I could just imagine her, you know, because there's a kind of wildness, I think, about all of these women that I really do admire, and that I think I see probably in myself. So in high school, she was also very seriously involved with political action groups. And she was inspired by Cesar Chavez. She was very, very smart. She went to college, became a teacher. Again, one of the reasons I really admire her is that she started out as a teacher, and she was brilliant in terms of lobbying. Cesar Chavez could be out there with the bullhorn and, you know, out in the field, but she was in the background doing all of the hard lobbying, meeting with Congress people, meeting with senators, and trying to get bills passed to aid farm workers. And she did. Just let me, I like to remember her by her quotes. And but before I tell you that, I want to tell you that one of the other inspiring aspects of Delores Huerta's life for me is that in spite of the fact that she suffered all kinds of brutality, she never gave up. You know, today we remember Breonna Taylor. When I think of Breonna Taylor, I also think of Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta, who was brutalized by a police officer when she was out there on the front lines marching and protesting. She was assaulted so severely by a police officer who worked with the San Francisco Police Department that her spleen was severely damaged. Can you imagine that? I mean, how many of you have heard of this woman, you know, who suffered such an assault, and yet she never gave up. She never gave up, and she never advocated for violence. Like Dr. King, she always advocated for nonviolence. You know, she's still alive. She turned 90 years old today. It's amazing that these women have lived so long, and she's still fighting. She still has this fighting spirit. In a speech she gave in 1966 that I think symbolizes her life, she gave it on behalf of the farm workers. She said, and quote, "We may act in strange and unusual ways, in our organizing, but we are willing to try new and unused methods to achieve justice for the farm workers, close quote. And there were all kinds of strange things that she would do. I'm not going to tell you all some of them, because I'm hoping at the end of this presentation that some of the students at Greenhills will be challenged to find out what some of those strange things were. So for now, I will just put those strange things under the rubric Delores Clara Fernandez Huerta was making good trouble.
Good. Nice. Now you mentioned there were 3 women. So who is the second woman?
The second woman is somebody that you know, and that if I remember correctly, Ms. Hall, I think you're the one who introduced me to her, and I had the wonderful pleasure of visiting her house on the east side of Detroit with you and walking in there. And one of the things I was immediately overwhelmed by was the books. There were books, 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 books all over. And I immediately loved this woman because, as you know, you walk into my house, there are books, 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 books all over. But Grace Lee Boggs, she died not so long ago. She died at the age of 100. Can you imagine? Grace Lee Boggs was Chinese, and she was absolutely brilliant. Oh, I think her brilliance came from, from her reading. She absolutely loved to read. At the age of 16, she was accepted at Barnard. She went on to earn a PhD from Bryn Mawr. But as was the case with so many women, so many of these women, in spite of her brilliance, in spite of her knowledge, in spite of her PhD, and it was a PhD. There's all this talk these days about certain women calling themselves doctor. Well, she's Dr. Grace Lee Boggs, legitimately earned a PhD. And she wanted to work in politics, but of course, she was a Chinese American. And, there were all these prejudices against not only hiring women, but hiring women of color, And so Grace decided that she would spend her life working at different levels. If she couldn't, she was a teacher, she couldn't work at the university level, she would spend her life in activism. One of the aspects of her life that I admire is that she joined a group that had as one of its founding member a man I greatly admire, C.L.R. James, a Trinidadian intellectual. And Grace and several of her friends joined with C.L.R. James to form a group. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about this group. Maybe Grace has not gotten the kind of recognition she deserved, because the group at one time was connected to the Workers' Party, which was connected to the Communist Party. And you know how greatly we fear communism in the United States. Well, some people do, although we don't know. So she and other members of this group, it was called the Johnson Johnson Forest Tendency. It's a very strange name for a group. She and other members believed that, quote, change would come from a well-organized, well-read, well-disciplined working class. And so she married an African-American, James Boggs, who worked in the auto industry, and she and James and others fought long and hard to organize the Detroit workers who slaved away in those factories. She never gave up believing that if you were organized, if you knew what you were doing, you knew your history, you could make a difference. She was not interested in making big money. She was interested in making big changes. One of the interesting aspects of her life, again, there's so many that I admire about her, is that she became part of Dr. King's movement. She was part of that great walk in Detroit. She loved Detroit. She moved, by the way, to Detroit, where she met her husband. And she was also intrigued by Malcolm X, you know? And so she was open to all of these ideas. She was open to Dr. King's ideas. She hosted Malcolm X on the verge of that moment when he was moving away from the Nation of Islam and to embrace a different type of activism. And she hosted him in her house. So that little house that we went into in the Detroit East Side, a lot of great people walked into that house.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, so Grace Lee Boggs, we want to remember her as one of those quiet dissidents, working in the background, working assiduously, not interested in big money, not interested in, you know, promoting herself on television, but interested in making life better for common people, interested in change. She started in her 90s. Grace Lee Boggs started a program that I know the Greenhills School students have been involved in, where she decided that all of these plots of land all over Detroit, you know, that were empty, right? Because either the houses had been burned or somehow the houses were no longer there. She decided that those plots of lands could be turned into gardens. And she started what came to be called, let's see, well, the Detroit Summer. She called the program Detroit Summer. For Detroit Summer, kids from the schools would come and plant gardens. So, you know, when we think of, you know, one of the leaders of the environmental movement in the United States, when we think of somebody who was interested in sustainability, when we think of somebody who remained in her adopted community, she never moved from that house on Detroit East Side, we can think of Grace Lee Boggs, a teacher, someone who believed in change and believed in change in a nonviolent way. Grace has told us, quote, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it, and that you see yourself as being responsible for changing it." It's the same kind of attitude Delores Huerta had. Don't wait for someone else to change the society within which you live. You must be at the vanguard of that change. And Ms. Hall, one of the stunning aspects for me, again, of the lives of these two women is that in spite of everything that happened to them, and Grace did not have an easy life.
Right.
They believed in the goodness and decency of America. Do you know, it's for me, it's mind-boggling, it's staggering that people who suffered immeasurably, people who had to overcome all kinds of vicissitudes in America still believed in its basic goodness and still believed that they could work to make a difference, to live a life that would allow America to live up to its possibilities. And that's what the third woman did as well.
Well, please, can you tell us about the third woman?
The third woman. The third woman sounds like a spy movie. The third woman. What a woman, what a woman, what a woman, what a woman. If I start to cry, Greenhills, forgive me, because this woman, Shirley Chisholm, is an extraordinary woman. By the way, Shirley Anita, my middle name is Anita as well. Shirley Chisholm was also the child of immigrants. She grew up in Brooklyn. Her father was from Guyana. Back then, when he left that country, it was called British Guyana. And her mother was from Barbados. So I can well imagine the strict, disciplined household in which Shirley Chisholm grew up. I could well imagine that she had books all around her, just like Grace Lee Boggs. I can well imagine that her parents taught her to believe in herself and to believe in the possibilities. They came from the West Indies to America in the time when America was in an uproar, racial uproar. Not that it has not always been in a racial uproar, but these were parents who believed in the possibilities that America could offer them, and they brought up Shirley to believe in that. And so growing up in Brooklyn, this young woman learned to fight the good fight. She went to Brooklyn College. She graduated from Brooklyn College in 1946. 1946, think of that, 74 years ago. She graduated from Brooklyn College. And again, she became a teacher. She went to teach at a school similar to Greenhills. It was called Friends Day School. It was a day nursery, but for younger kids. But while she was working, and something I know a great deal about as a teacher in the day, she went to school at night and got her MA in elementary education from Columbia University. So she graduated from there in 1952. And all the while she was in college, all the while growing up in Brooklyn, she was involved with the NAACP. She was involved in local groups. That's the other thing that's really quite important for Greenhills students to understand, that these women were all involved, not just in stuff at school, but they were involved in their communities. They were community activists long before that term became popularized by President Obama. They were part of the NAACP. They were part of women's groups. They were part of all kinds of groups. Grace Lee Boggs, I forgot to say, was a key member of the Save Our Children group in Detroit. This is a group of mothers who were working with the city to stop the violence against their sons and daughters. And she didn't have a son or daughter who had been killed or anything like that in Detroit, but she went out there and worked with them. Anyway, back to Shirley Chisholm. Shirley decided that she was gonna run for office. So she ran for office to represent her Brooklyn district in the state legislature, and she did so from 1964 to 1968. Then this woman this woman, Greenhills, had the audacity to believe that she could run for national office. And so she says, I'm gonna make me a congresswoman. You know, I'm gonna be a congresswoman. She won her election to the United States Congress against James Farmer, who was a very important Black congressman at the time. Shirley dared to believe that she could win that seat. And so she became the first Black woman. Think of that, the first African American woman to have before her name Congresswoman Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm. So in 1968, there she was, being the only African American woman in Congress. Can you know, I have been the only in several situations, right? And I know what it feels like. I know the loneliness of being the only. I know what it feels like to walk out of a room in which you and all your colleagues are meeting, and the meeting ends and you walk out and all of them stay behind. And you're walking down the hallway and nobody's walking with you, and you're wondering, oh my God, what are they saying about you? Because you know they're saying stuff about you. They're saying stuff about you that they couldn't say to your face in that room. You know, the audacity, the boldness of Shirley Chisholm to believe that she could run for Congress and that she could win. It's not just audacity. Again, I think it goes back to Ms. Hall, a faith in America, a belief in the basic goodness and decency of American people. So Shirley Chisholm set her eyes on the presidency. I'm gonna become, or at least I'm gonna give it one hell of a try, become the President of the United States of America. Of course, she was the first woman from the Democratic Party. The Republican Party had never put up a woman either. So she was the first woman from either party to say, I am going to try to become the President of the United States. And what was so incredible about Shirley Chisholm is that, and I've looked at some of the buttons and all of that, and banners and plaques and posters, she wanted to be president of all people. Mm-hmm. She wasn't thinking of being president for this group or this little group, you know, or these people over here. She wanted to be of service to the whole of America. And she stressed that over and over and over. But of course, you know, she didn't win. Did she believe that she would win? I don't know. I never had the opportunity to talk to Shirley Chisholm, but I believe that if she believed in anything, she believed in the basic goodness and decency of the American voting public. The Democratic Party chose George McGovern as its nominee. She didn't win the nomination, but what she did do was open that door for women like Hillary Clinton, women like Ocasio, so many women, Ocasio-Cortez, you know, member of that, what do they call themselves? The Fabulous Five?
Like that.
In Congress. You know, until her retirement, and she died in 2005, I surely believed in the goodness of America. I think today, how many women do we have in women of color? We have, I believe, 48 women of color serving in the American United States Congress. 4 are senators and 44 are in the House. And if all goes well, I think we will have a few more in 2021. All of these women of color are standing on the shoulders of this tiny woman named Shirley Anita Chisholm. And it just warms my heart, you know, to think of her and to think of her courage, to think of her boldness, to think of her daring to believe in the goodness of this country. It is because of her. And by the way, I don't want to talk about anything spiritual or religious, but it seems to me something uncanny that the woman who would become the first woman to become vice president of the United States is also a daughter of immigrants and is also a daughter of a West Indian immigrant. Oh, how Shirley Chisholm must be dancing wherever she is. I hope I get to dance with her one day, dancing for joy that Kamala Harris
Senator.
will be the first woman of color to be vice president of the United States of America. And so I want to end with a few words. Somebody asked Shirley once, you know, how do you want to be remembered? She said, I want history to remember me not as the first Black woman to have made a bid for the presidency of the United States, but as a Black woman who lived in the 20th century and who dared to be herself. I want to be remembered as a catalyst for change in America, close quote. There is no other way, I think, these women, Delores Huerta, Grace Lee Boggs, Shirley Anita Chisholm, could have fought the good fight, could have made all the good trouble they made in this country if they did not believe in the basic goodness and decency of America. And I think that is what we need going into this new year under this new presidency, in this new environment. We need always to remember that we live in what John Lewis called the beloved country, America.
Thank you, Dr. Flanagan. Now, I know at the beginning of this, we had talked about issuing, you and I, a challenge to our Greenhills students about this idea of making good trouble.
Yes, you know, there's so many things for them to do. There's so many things. As I was researching Shirley Chisholm's life, I came across so many bills that she had sponsored. And I thought, you know, I wonder if Greenhills students know about some of the bills, the important bills having to do with higher education. Many of you students will be going on, let's hope, to college in the not too distant future. I hope not through Zoom. But, you know, Shirley Chisholm fought for the rights of Native American people. And I thought how wonderful it might be if, you know, small groups of students could research some of the bills, the whole process of even getting a bill sponsored in Congress. You know, I think it's time for students to get back to civics. Civics leads to a great extent to civility, something that many of us have lost, find wanting in the United States these days. And I think understanding what it takes, the kind of bipartisan work that somebody like Shirley Chisholm would have had to do, just working together in a group, right? To develop something, to sponsor something. So there are lots of different programs that your Davidson, not Davidson, I always think of Davidson and Greenhills in the same mode.
Students go there.
Greenhills students could do. I don't want to tell them, what they should do, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you and the other teachers at Greenhills about some of the projects that they have challenged themselves to do, not for themselves, not so that they could put it on, a list of things they accomplished in high school, but for the good of someone else in the community beyond Greenhills, in the community that supports the goodness and decency that these women believed is embedded in the fabric of America.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flanagan, for sharing your time with us and talking about these three incredible, amazing women. And I'm sure we at Greenhills will pick up that challenge and we will try to make some good trouble.
Please make good trouble. All right. I wish I had my t-shirt, making good trouble. Let me see yours.
I have mine says, right.
Okay, so go out, honor these women, honor John Lewis, honor Mahatma Gandhi, honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and make some good trouble in the world. Goodbye, Greenhills.
Thank you.